Hi.
Hi.
Ah,
So, how do we want to go about this?
well, how did you have the original? How did you come across the book originally, or how did you have the original idea? Because you brought the idea to me when you
Yeah.
were.
Well, because you and I had worked so well on a couple of projects, I knew that I wanted to write something with you, and I wanted to write something big with you, like not just a song or two here
Yeah,
and there.
yeah.
And we'd been talking about various things, but nothing quite took for me. And I've always had this preoccupation I don't really understand with the First World War. It just feels like it's the war that ushered modernism into Western culture, and it's also the war that ushered irony into Western culture, which it and modernism seem to be
Yeah.
connected. So I'd been thinking about writing something directly about the First World War for a long time. I've always written indirectly about it. It shows up in a lot of my Greeky stuff, sort of in the background, or sort of structurally, or sort of, by implication. But I wanted to write something directly. And so I was reading, I was doing a production of Midsummer Night's Dream down at the McCarter.
Oh, right. I
Yeah.
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And it moved to the paper mill. And I was reading a New York Review of Books review of a new history book that had come out that was called The Living Unknown Soldier, that was based on this strange incident that was really compelling and it felt provocative in a kind of big abstract way, which was about an amnesiac soldier in the First World War and his being sent to an asylum and the head of the asylum not being able to figure out who he was. I mean, he was deeply, deeply traumatized. And then the head of the asylum having this idea of putting his photograph into all the French newspapers and just sort of trying to find his original family in case that family could jog his memory. And sort of not thinking through the fact that there were 300,000 French families who had lost a son and never gotten any trace of that body back to mourn. And so that there was this kind of disconnect, this inability to accept the death. And so hundreds of people claimed this man. And then the long years of the process of those families not giving up those claims even when they met him, even when they clearly couldn't have been his family. But the desire to reclaim some, this loved one from the, Holocaust of war was so strong. So I read it and I thought, this is such an amazing story and so sad and so, just resonant with what war costs, the loss, how it drives people crazy, both the people who fight it and the people who stay home and are bereft by it.
I remember just thinking like, okay, well, this seems promising. The two things that really struck me about it were the time period. I was like, well, that's a time period where there's a lot of different kinds of music that interest me. But also, I was like, oh, a musical about an amnesiac. That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
What'll he sing like,
Yeah. And then we ran into the problem, which is we had a central character who makes no sound. I mean, he's literally mute
Right.
for half of the first act. And I was like, why do we think that was
Well,
a
and
good
I
idea?
remember, too, the first few things that you wrote that you gave me, were not for him.
Yeah.
Or for the doctor. It was, it
They're
was
for the women, yeah.
Yeah, for the women and the chorus, and so it there was a sense when we were starting out of not really knowing where this was going to lead or how those two seemingly central characters were going to fit into the story. I was like, maybe they're not going to be central characters.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I mean, when I read the when I read the book, I thought this is an amazing story to dramatize, but it's not a play, it's a musical. It needs the size of music to express these truths.
And it was sort of interesting trying to determine whether we were going to look at sort of the vernacular music or the sort of pop music of the time,
Yeah.
or the more like art music of the time, and sort of
Both.
we got a little both in there, which was fun. I mean, that was one of the things that was clear early on from the things that you were writing, even when we were at Sundance at UCross. That there were going to be a lot of different things going on. Like you said, there was the world of the women, and there was the inner life of the patient, and there was the patient-doctor relationship, and there was a larger choral component, of the larger society. And so it seemed like there was going to be opportunities to do different, kinds of music, and not necessarily have to have it be, of one tone, or,
Yeah. It's not a straight-ahead musical, and every time that anybody's given us notes to try to sort of hack off the corners and at the edges and turn it into something more straightforward or conventional, it just resists that in a big way.
Yeah.
It just always wants to be what it wants to be, which is a sort of a hybrid piece that has a lot of dimension to it. It's a complicated emotional landscape,
Right.
and therefore a complicated musical landscape, but a tonal landscape, because it has humor, this kind of dark humor to it, and this sort of rueful, ironic tone occasionally, but then it has big, heart-opening pieces that really need to be just sort of naked. For me, writing lyrics is just such a different skill. It's that skill, like with set designers. I remember my friend Susan Hilferty talking about set design and saying that the big lesson that she learned early on was that the set should not look complete until the human being walks onto it. That there should always be the sense that the set is in need of the animation of the human, and the lyric needs to be incomplete without the music. It can't be a complete.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's why sometimes musical settings of great poems just are flat.
Right, because what is the
it's
music
like,
doing?
It doesn't need
it's not
to
helping.
be, it's not helping. We've had a hard time finding a home for this, and that's why we're so grateful that you at Montclair have embraced the show in all of its quirkiness, because we've had many people, many theaters basically say, well, if you could just cut all of these characters, or if you could just concentrate on the women, or if you could just concentrate on this relationship, or, and it just kept on feeling like, no, but that's not the point.
And I think,
streamlining it or evening it out in some way.
Right. And I mean, and also not just the content, but the size.
Yeah.
Which to me doesn't seem that large. I mean, I am a big fan of big art, and I also grew up, seeing those big Harold Prince productions that made me want to write musicals like, Sweeney Todd and Evita and those shows in the 70s and 80s, late 70s and 80s, where I didn't get into this to write musicals with 5 people in them, and even the cast size of this show seems conservative to me. But when you try to write a musical that's about this subject matter in this stylistic, vocabulary or this aesthetic, and you want to have 11, 12 people and, as many musicians as they'll let you have, it's very hard. It's very hard to find any theater, any professional theater that is interested in doing a musical where you're saying up front, this is not intended to transfer to Broadway.
Yeah.
And we've always sort of known that this was not going to be transferring
No.
to Broadway.
But I think that the thing that has always marked it as worthwhile, as far as I'm concerned, is the thing that's always been most challenging for anybody to embrace, which is its ambition. It really is taking on a big, big thing and trying to talk ambitiously about it.
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, it sounds pompous, but I also feel like that what I like about it is that I feel like it contains truth, in the sense that I go, oh yes, those are real feelings, like I relate to the emotions that our characters express and given the situations they're going through. And honestly, sometimes I don't feel that way at every musical that I go to see. I think that doesn't ring true to me. That feels like the thing that you have to do there because,
It's what's required by the form.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
And business-wise, I mean, it was hard before.
Yeah.
As we just discovered, and unfortunately, it's even harder now. And I think we're exactly where we need to be making work like this.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating not to see more work like this from other people because it's just not financially viable or.
Yeah, of course, one does see work that is inspiring and that somehow slips through the
From
commercial
Europe,
cracks.
yeah.
And sometimes, I think The Band's Visit is a great example of something that, if you pitched that to, a Broadway producer, nobody would pick that up. But somehow it managed, because it had a really committed producer, it managed to slide through those cracks and make it to Broadway, and which was just delightful and a wonderful surprise, and it was like the best thing on Broadway.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
And you can't anticipate a Hamilton until it happens.
Sure.
And it's precisely because Hamilton doesn't look like any other musical that it has been so successful, as opposed to all the, forgettable musicals that we've all seen. They come and go, and they...
that shall remain nameless. Yeah.
Well, I think what's wonderful about it is that people will be the right age. If we're working with people in their, early 20s, late teens, this is
Most
a tragedy
of them will be,
that does concern people of that age, because those are the people we send to war.
Right.
And those are the people who are married to, and the people who were sent to war. I mean, war is for young people.
Yeah.
And the traumas that it inflicts are inflicted young. So I think that it would be good to have that level, the people who are really inside that particular vulnerable and powerful moment in their lives. As young people at the beginning of their lives who get brought up short by this catastrophe of war. And I also find that, students work harder sometimes than professionals.
Yeah, and
because
they're not
care
sitting there
more.
going, how is this going to get me my Tony
Yeah,
Award?
right. And let me call my agent
Right.
before we do that scene again.
All right.
No, I think it'll be great because and they have to commit to each other, which I think people who are already part of the company of school will have already done. They'll make a coherent company without having to sort of work through, navigate through all of the things that separate a bunch of professionals who are brought in. They're already part of this campus and part of this experience. And so I think that they'll bond more quickly than a professional company would. But, I find the passion of young people really helpful.
Yeah, the energy and
You can't
overturn the...
Yeah. Influenza epidemic, of course, factors into our play. But the influenza epidemic that hit the Western world immediately on the heels of the First World War actually killed more people than the war did. And we always forget that until right now.
It's one of those things that if you were making it up, nobody would believe it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this just,
It's 1-2 punch.
appalling, like, devastation from this war followed immediately by even more devastation from a pandemic, you
Yeah.
know, and here we are,
Yeah.
in the time of another pandemic. I mean, the influenza in 1918, it does factor into our story. It's not an enormous part of but it is a crucial
It's
backdrop
a crucial
for
thing.
yeah. So but yeah, it's hard to believe what that generation of people went. I mean, can you imagine if you managed to survive the war and then you come home and you die of the flu, or your
Yeah.
loved one dies of the flu? I mean, yeah, it's almost too much to
Yeah.
bear.
It's grotesque.
Yeah.
The glory of the theater as a medium for me is all about presence, that we are
Yeah.
present, physically present, that the medium is physically present for the audience and for the people making it, and that we are within touching distance of each other.
I
And-
wonder how that will affect casting, actually. I hadn't thought about this, but
Yeah.
that sense of presence is so important to me when I'm looking for performers, because it's so easy to get dazzled by chops, by technique. Oh, wow, they're hitting that high A, and listen to them sing that. But there's also, you want to avoid the sort of unbearable fakery of being that you sometimes get in musical theater,
Yeah.
performing,
Yeah.
and so that sense of presence of who are you really is something I'm always kind of trying to ascertain during the very short moment that an actor has to come in and show you who they are.
Yeah, and I think
And
that
I wonder what that will be like on Zoom.
that desire to find out who are you really is the entirety of the theater experience. That's what we're trying to do as an audience.
Right.
That's what you're trying to do with the other characters on stage is, wait, what did you mean by that? And what are you really saying? And are you lying? What's underneath the surface of the text? What's the subtext,
Yeah.
And that is a physical thing.
Right.
It's like
It's
there's
hard.
no amount of close-ups that really do that. You can find out so much just by the way a person occupies space.
Yeah, it's hard to see into their soul on Zoom.
Yeah, when it's like this,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they could
And-
be not wearing pants,
Yeah.
for all you know.
It's just and hard to do like dance auditions.
Yes.
We've got work to do,
Yeah.
and we'll figure out a way to do it. But it's obviously not ideal, and we will, by God, someday have an actual physical performance of this thing on a stage with actual people.
With actual people.
who can touch each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait for that.
Unmasked people who can touch. That's all we
Yes.
ask. Yeah.